all across America and around the world. This is Veterans Radio. This is Veterans Radio.
Welcome to Veterans Radio. I am Jim Fausone. I'm the officer of the deck today. We've got some great programs for you. I think you'll find very interesting. We always want to remind you can find more about Veterans Radio at its Facebook site or by going to veteransradio.net, where we're on the web 24/7. You can find a lot of our podcasts there as well. We post new ones every Tuesday, so you can get a new story, a new interview, something you didn't know before by going to veteransradio.net. And before we get started, we want to thank our sponsors. First up, we want to thank National Veteran Business Development Council, nvbdc.org. It was established to certify both service-disabled and veteran-owned businesses. You'll find out how they can help your business by going to nvbdc.org. We also want to thank Eisenhower Center. It's a brain injury recovery center. Learn more about eisenhowercenter.com. They're located in Michigan and in Florida. We want to thank Legal Help for Veterans. Legal Help for Veterans fights for veterans' disability rights all across the nation. You can reach them at 800-693-4800 or on the web at legalhelpforveterans.com. Contact us if you'd like to be a sponsor on Veterans Radio, and let's move on to our program. We want to welcome to Veterans Radio today, Phil Klay. Phil, welcome to Veterans Radio.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we're going to have a little fun here, getting understanding your background, and then we're going to talk about some of your projects, including the new PBS series American Veteran, and some books you're writing. But Phil, I know you were born in White Plains, New York. How did a nice kid like you end up in the Marine Corps?
Well, my country went to war. I always grew up with a respect for service to country. I actually wanted to be a diplomat when I was a kid. I didn't think that I was going to be in the military in any way. But I went to college in 2001. 9/11 happened. We were soon in a war in Afghanistan, and then soon after that, we were going to Iraq. So, it just seemed like if I wanted to serve my country, this was the best way to do it.
Well, let's back up. You glossed over a couple of points that I know are important, and I think kind of sort of shape your values and maybe your direction, which is your father served in the Peace Corps, and your maternal grandfather was a career diplomat. It sounds
Yes.
like those things had an impact on your values growing up.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And my mother had worked in international medical aid, right? So the idea of service is something that was extremely important, was just there in my family for sure.
And I think that's one of the things we find here in talking to folks on Veterans Radio, Phil, is that, maybe it wasn't said around the dinner table, but it was just absorbed around the dinner table that, granddad had served this way and dad had served this way and mom had served that way. And they're not necessarily beating it into your head that you have to serve, but it kind of gets into your DNA, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And actually, three of us, I'm one of 5 boys, and 3 of us ended up joining the service.
God, your mother's a saint, 5 boys.
Yeah, absolutely. She definitely is.
So you went off to Dartmouth College. Talk to us a little bit about that, because from there you went off to Officer Candidate School.
Yeah, so I studied history and writing in college. Had a good time there. It was a fun place to be. And then I joined them. I did OCS during my summer. So my junior summer, I did 10 weeks of OCS. My older brother had done Marine Corps OCS in sort of 2 installments. I think they did 2 6-week versions. And he was like, you should do it all in one because, just get it over with.
Sometimes it's worth listening to our older brothers.
Sometimes, yeah.
Just sometimes. So when you went into the Marine Corps, tell us about your MOS and kind of what you thought you were going to do and actually what you ended up doing.
Yeah, so I didn't know what I was going to do. I was happy to do anything. And I was assigned to be a public affairs officer, which was pretty up fairly high in the list of things that I'd sort of, because you list the different MOSs that you might want. And I think in the sort of initial sort, that hadn't been what I'd gotten, but I think the SPCs put me in as that, because I was like the guy out, like, memorizing poetry and field exercises. So maybe it seemed like a fit.
Well, that's where the history and writing experience and degrees from Dartmouth College came into play. And tell folks, maybe they're not aware of what public affairs officers do. Give them a little bit of that and what your job duties were.
Sure. So as a public affairs officer, you have a group of Marines who work for you, combat correspondents. So if you've seen Full Metal Jacket, you can think of Joker, right? And they go out to different units and take photos and video and write stories about what the Marines are doing. And so we publish stories about what the different units are doing, provide information back to the families about, what their husbands, wives, sons, children are doing, sons, daughters, children are doing. And then also we coordinate with, sort of national media coming through, everybody from relatively small, sort of local papers to, New York Times correspondents or Time Magazine or whatever would be coming through, hopping a ride on military aircraft or going out with Marine units to see what's going on in the war. And so, and you're also an advisor to the commanding general. And I did, other things, like there was a brief period where I was the aide de camp, during my time in Iraq. So, but it was a great job in many ways, because the thing about it that I really liked was you got to spend time with a lot of different types of Marines, a lot of different units. You saw a kind of really wide range of the Marine Corps, of what people were doing, of all that it took to actually sort of run this thing. And so, I do everything from go on patrols with infantry guys to spend time with doctors or mortuary affairs guys, the guys who are responsible for preparing the bodies of the dead to be sent home. So just logistics, maintenance, the whole, engineers, everything. And so it was really fascinating in that regard.
Yeah, if you have a curious nature, which it sounds like you do, that sort of thing gave you exposure to a real wide variety of tasks and jobs and missions that probably made it all that much more interesting. And you spent a year over in Iraq and Anbar province, as I understand it.
Yes.
Give us the time frame for that and sort of what was going on.
Yeah, so this was during the surge. So if you remember, the war was not going particularly well. There'd been a lot of violence in 2006. And then President Bush decided that he would sort of go with a new strategy. They would increase the number of troops. The troops were being taught to implement counterinsurgency theory, the idea being that you had to work with the local population, understand what was driving them, get them on your side, get out more among the communities, and that sort of thing. And so when we went to Anbar, I think it was the most violent place in Iraq at the time. And, there was a suicide bombing outside our main gate the first month I was there, a lot of injured civilians. And then what happened over time was you had the Anbar Awakening, which was a bunch of tribal elders and sheikhs and such who decided to work with the Americans. And so they started convincing people to join the police force. They started giving us information, and we were able to, with their help, bring down the level of violence in the province. So for us, it seemed as though things were going very well by the time that I left Iraq.
And you served from 2005 to 2009, getting out of the Marine Corps and going on and picking up a master's degree in creative writing from Hunter College in 2011, using the GI Bill, which many of us did to advance our education.
Yeah, it was incredible.
And at that point, and we're talking to Phil Klay, why does a Marine think he can do a bunch of writing and make a living writing?
Well, I didn't think I could make a living writing, and I apologize. My voice is hoarse because I'm sick. I didn't think I could make a living writing, but I was originally going to be a teacher. So I did my master's degree at Hunter, and then I went on to teachers college, and the plan was ultimately to become a high school teacher, but I sold my first book while I was at teachers college, and after that, I sold my first book while I was at teachers college, and just have been writing ever since. Yeah.
Well, that first book was Redeployment, a short story collection. I think it won the 2014 National Book Award for Fiction, and you were on your way. It's an interesting lesson, though, because to pass along to our veteran radio listeners, Phil, because the plan was, I'm going to college here, I'm going to be a high school teacher. But another opportunity arose, right? One of the things we learn in the military, you can do all the planning you want, but maybe you got to change course, don't you?
Yeah. So, good to have a plan.
Well, yeah, absolutely, and great that another opportunity presented itself, and you've written books, articles, all sorts of different things that we could spend the time talking about. But I wanted to sort of, one of those things that came along, never would have expected it, I think you'd probably agree, is this opportunity to be involved with public broadcasting stations, PBS. Tell us how that series came about and how that opportunity presented itself.
Right. So Insignia Films spent years really interviewing veterans of all different types. They really wanted to get a wide diversity of veterans of different wars, veterans who did lots of different things, who had different experiences, who had different politics, different responses to the wars that they were in, who had very different careers after the wars. And they put together this documentary, which was aired on PBS, which you can watch if you go to the PBS site. It's called American Veteran, where they organized each episode of the documentary around sort of critical moments in the veteran experience. So military training, right? That decision to enter the military, and that first exposure to military training, going to war, coming home from war, the aftermath of war. And so you get sort of all of these different perspectives thematically tied together. And this was the part, that surprised me, but was very cool. They realized that they had all of this material from really remarkable people, right? And material that sort of couldn't be told in full in the documentary as it was aired on television. But that was remarkable because it had people telling their whole life stories. So you have Frank DeVito, a World War II veteran who was at Omaha, right? And you get his story, that first wave, letting people off of his boat. This just unbelievably gripping story of what happened to him. And then, everything after that, coming home, his life and his career, the fact that he never even told his wife that what he had been through, and it was only after she died that he finally broke his silence. You have Shoshana Johnson, the first Black female POW, and her story of being captured in Iraq, what happened to her, but also, the experience of coming home, of dealing with it, of sort of connecting with her family in a different way and pushing members of her family to start to process aspects of their military experience that they hadn't, as she was trying to deal with, what she had gone through. The difficulties in the dating market when insecure guys can't really handle, a woman who's been to war and is decorated for her behavior there. So just like, a range of veterans, there are people who, one of the veterans we profiled became a conscientious objector. Another one loved the military. He was doing one of the most dangerous jobs in World War II. He was on a bomber crew. A quarter of the bombers that we put into the air went down. And yet he kept volunteering for missions because he thought it was so exciting. And the military sort of opened up new worlds for him. So it's just this really kind of remarkable range of people.
And Phil, I want to give restate sort of some credit here. This series, American Veteran Unforgettable Stories, is a production of Insignia Films for WGBH, produced by Curtis Fox. And it's sort of one of those things where you say, well, it had to take a lot of time to stitch all these individual stories together, because what you're doing is educating. This is less for the veterans, if you will, and more about trying to educate the civilian population, which is 99% of the population, of what folks do as military service members. How did you become, if you will, the voice of this?
They asked me to do it. They had interviewed me in the series. I think that they liked some of the things that I said. They just asked me if I'd be willing to be the host. And so, I worked with Curtis Fox and some of the other folks. And we put together a script. Mostly it's just the stories of these people. Sometimes I put in a little bit of kind of context or other details that you might need. But the focus is really on, getting the stories of some of the most remarkable people that this documentary crew interviewed over the course of years of searching out some of the most fascinating veterans around. So.
Well, it's an interesting. I mean, it took a long time to put together, but it is as I say, I think it's the education is really, at least the way I see it, is more for the general public. As you were hosting this, did you feel you were talking to veterans, or did you feel you were talking to that other 99%?
I don't know. I think there would be something for everyone because, you may think you know a lot about the military, right? But you probably don't know all the corners of experience of like a Vietnam era nurse, right? And what they went through. You probably, you don't know what it was like to be, one of the Tuskegee airmen who was captured, right? And in a POW camp, right? And those are some really interesting stories. So I think there's something for the veteran and the civilian alike. And I think the hope is that people would be able to listen to this and that would provide an entry point for conversation for both veterans and non-veterans.
I also think it gives us veterans a look into maybe, as you say, something we didn't really experience ourselves, whether it was because we're not in the Coast Guard or, we're not a Black or African-American woman or man, in service, or a Native American or a gay man during a don't ask, don't tell era. So it gave us a look into some of those other areas that certainly we wouldn't have been exposed to in our, whether it be 2 years, 4 years, or 20 years of service.
Yeah, for sure.
And as this, as you've talked to folks, and this is now out, as you say, you can see it on PBS, you can find it on the internet, there's a podcast version. Talk a little bit about the reaction you're getting from people.
Oh, well, it's funny because I think some people are just really gripped by different stories, right? My wife's favorite story that she listened to thus far was the story of the Vietnam era nurse, right? She found, not just her story extremely compelling, but the person, right? And how she talked about it and what she'd been through, just really insightful and compelling. I know that some people, when they listen to sort of Frank DeVita's story, it is just one of the most emotionally gripping things you can possibly imagine. Other people, there's a guy who was, gay man in the military during Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and what eventually outed him to his command was when his partner was shot and ultimately killed by a cop. And he wanted to go home to see him as he was dying. And, that is a very intense thing. And, with each one, you see the ways that they think about their experience, ways that that they think about their time in the military. There's obviously for me, I like the writers. So there's, a World War II veteran, the one who I mentioned, who kept volunteering for missions, who went on to become a poet, right? And I found his story and the whole trajectory of his life and what he took from the military just to be really fascinating. And so it's sort of fun to see what resonates with people and what really captures them.
Well, as somebody who studied history and is a writer by profession and who thought he was going to be a teacher,
Yeah, I did.
Have you thought about how this kind of series, this sort of one-on-one story, which is what this is really about, it's each person's individual story, how it has a way of opening up history that you couldn't just do in a I'll call it a dry history book.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, what's your reaction to that?
I think that's absolutely true. I think that it makes it incredibly vivid and just, you see what people are going through and the choices that they're making, and the ways that they see the world in relationship to what they've been through. So, the experience of war in the military for these folks, it doesn't just stay during that sort of discrete chunk of time when they were in service. It informs how they go on and live their lives, and in some cases, be very kind of prominent people or do important things later on in their lives. And so, in that regard, it's just incredibly eye-opening and makes you see these sort of broader narratives of history in a very different and intimate way.
Well, here on Veterans Radio, we're really all about telling veteran stories, sort of getting that word out, helping folks understand, what veterans go through in the military, how everybody's got their own story, and there are lessons to learn from every one of these stories. And I think as the host of this series for PBS, American Veteran, you've done a great job, and they've done a great job putting this together. I commend you. But before I let you kind of sneak your way out of here, because I wanted to make fun about a Marine who thinks he can write. It's one thing to write about real life experiences that you have, the nonfiction world, but you've written your first novel.
Yes, I have.
So tell us a little bit about the creative juices that had you write Missionaries, which was just released about a year ago, I guess, and did real well and is doing real well. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so my first book was a book of short stories about Iraq. It was called Redeployment, and it was 12 different characters all in Iraq, and I've been thinking and writing about American wars for a long time now. And I, write a lot of essays and things like that. And the more that I thought about these things, the more it seemed insufficient to just talk about one war, right? So, and to give you an example why, there's a scene in the book late in the book where have a Colombian mercenary who's looking through the optics of a Chinese-made drone, which is communicating over sort of Swedish telecommunications infrastructure to an Emirati pilot who's about to drop an American bomb on a Yemeni tribesman, right?
This doesn't sound like fiction at this point. That's just about reality.
Well, yeah, that is reality. And, when you look at something like that, right, it becomes clear that you can't just talk about one conflict, right? And if you're trying to talk about how we wage war now and the ways in which, we're sort of reshaping the world through that violence, right? And so I decided I was going to create a novel where I have sort of different characters who start out in different theaters of conflict. So, you meet one person in Afghanistan, you meet one person in Iraq, and you meet two other characters in Colombia, which a lot of people don't know has been the largest recipient of military aid in the Western Hemisphere since the end of the Clinton administration, right? And the other thing that a lot of people don't know about Colombia is that we keep sort of exporting lessons learned or from Colombia to other conflicts that it's seen as a sort of success case. So every ambassador to Colombia post 9/11 has gone on to work in the war on terror in some regard. Two of our ambassadors to Colombia, their next posting was to be the ambassador to Afghanistan. One of them later said there was no place in the world we had more going on than Colombia, including Afghanistan. And so what ends up happening in the novel is these sort of four characters, the sort of fates become entwined because of a military strike in a very poor region of Colombia on the border with Venezuela. And so I wanted to sort of show sort of at various different levels of the conflict, the ways that we wage war now. So, one of the characters kind of lives in this village, and sort of when violence happens, he experiences it as somebody who has to navigate the new sort of social and political landscape in the wake of violence. I have a Colombian military officer. I have a American special forces guy who is sort of at odds with the ways that the mission of special forces has changed over the course of the war on terror. This is sort of a debate that's happened within the SF community. And then you have an American journalist who's kind of trying to make sense of it all. And yeah, so that was sort of the idea behind the novel.
Well, it sounds fascinating. I haven't read it. I will. We want to encourage our veteran radio listeners to pick it up and look at it. I think they'll find it. It's got all the elements, both fact and fiction, that I think will make it a quick and enjoyable read. But one more thing I want to ask you about. You wrote on this in the New Yorker a little bit a couple of months back after the pullout of Afghanistan, the American pullout of Afghanistan. Give us your view on what the conclusion of this 20-year war kind of means locally in Afghanistan and more globally to the United States.
I think that it means that we have to think very hard about the ways that we wage war. I think that it means that we, for a long time, we have essentially ceded responsibility for war making to the president, right? We're still operating on the same authorization for the use of military force that we had in effect after 9/11, and that has been interpreted to allow presidents to, kill people who belong to groups that didn't even exist then, right? And instead of regularly debating and voting on the use of American force, Congress sort of just has this kind of open-ended blank check for American presidents. And I don't think that ultimately results in good policy. I think we need more oversight, and I think that we need more political leaders to regularly be debating our military policy. I think the president should have to come before Congress every couple of years and explain where we have troops in harm's way, where we're killing people, why we're killing people, what it's supposed to do, what the benchmarks of success are going to be. So in 2 more years, when he comes back to ask for the mission to continue, we can actually judge whether or not we did any of the things that we said we were doing it for. And I want to know how much it's going to cost. I think that's that's a fairly basic thing that a democracy should demand if we're going to be overseas. And I don't think we have any chance of having responsible military policy if we don't actually force our elected leaders to to vote on these things and to make decisions and to make hard calls. The other thing that I think we can take away from it is that we have, the limits of American nation building, right? And the extent to which we allowed ourselves to fool ourselves about what we had done. I mean, the speed with which the Kabul government fell was astonishing, right? After 20 years of pouring unbelievable resources into it, right? It became very clear that what we had created was basically a mirage to fool ourselves, right? Rather than a sustainable government.
Yeah.
The other thing, yeah.
No, go ahead and give us that.
We have failed a lot of the people who believed in us, who risked their lives for us. And, I've been on the phone with folks who work for the U.S. government who are still in Kabul, right? Whose lives are at risk because they work for us. Some of their stories are unbelievably harrowing. And we failed to really plan for an evacuation of those people. During the Trump years, we shut them out, right? We didn't allow much in the way of immigration from those countries, including for people who had worked for us, who had risked their lives for us. And then we didn't adequately plan for evacuation during the Biden presidency. And there's still people there, and there's a lot of things that we can do and should be doing to help those people. And the folks who are here, who did get out, need more aid and support, right? Because the current assistance for those folks is not sufficient. And there are a lot of great sort of local programs and charitable organizations that work on those issues. And I believe welcome.us is a website you can go to get linked up to some folks. But that, I think, is a sort of moral stand. I've been talking to veterans who've been working on this. As one of the guys said, his interpreter is here, but his family is still in Afghanistan. And he said to me, this guy saved my life like multiple times. Why would I ever stop doing everything that I can for his family to try and get his family out? And it didn't have to be this way, right? There's no reason that guy's family should still be stuck over there, right, with their lives at risk. There's no reason that so many people, one of my friends was working on a case and the guy was murdered.
I think unfortunately the whatever you want to call it, the political, military, industrial complex sort of grinds up individuals. And part of that is there aren't those discussions ahead of time or transparency, whatever word you like.
And by the way, this is a national security issue as well, right? Yeah. Because the way that we wage war now is through the use of local partners, right? So wherever we are doing counterterrorism missions, we are relying on locals to help us. And as one guy who works in this space told me, he said, why would anyone trust us seeing how we treated our allies in Afghanistan?
Yeah, there's a much bigger issue there, because I think you can say the same thing if you're sitting in Taiwan or South Korea or a lot of places where you're going, I wonder if the promises are really going to be followed through on. Phil Klay, I want to really thank you for the time, the extra time you've given us today as the host of American Veteran, the PBS series. I'm glad we got a chance to talk about a couple of things you've written on recently and some thoughts about Afghanistan. And thanks for giving us some time this afternoon for Veterans Radio, Phil.
Thank you.
And I want to thank everybody for listening to Veterans Radio today. I am Jim Fausone. It's been a pleasure to be your host. I'm a veterans disability lawyer at Legal Help for Veterans, and you can reach us at 800-693-4800 or legalhelpforveterans.com on the web. You can follow Veterans Radio on Facebook and listen to its podcasts and internet radio shows by going to veteransradio.net. And until next time, you are dismissed.
If you have a VA claim denied by the Board of Veterans' Appeals, contact Legal Help for Veterans at 1-800-693-4800. They're experts in handling cases before the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. Their number again, 1-800-693-4800.
We again want to thank our national sponsors, the National Veterans Business Development Council, nvbdc.org. Eisenhower Center, VA Ann Arbor Health Care System, the Vietnam Veterans of America Charles S. Kettles Chapter, Ann Arbor, Michigan, VFW Graf O'Hara Post 423 in Ann Arbor, and the American Legion Press Corn Post 46, also in Ann Arbor. They keep us on the air, as does your support. Go to Facebook, go to veteransradio.net, and support our efforts. And until next time, you are dismissed.
Judy was boring.
Hello.
Then Judy discovered ChumbaCasino.com.
It's my little escape.
Now Judy's the life of the party.
Oh, baby, mama's bringing home the bacon.
Whoa, take it easy, Judy. The Chumba life is for everybody. So go to ChumbaCasino.com and play over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.